back to another episode of the Quarantine Diaries. I'm going to be honest, when I started making these videos 30 days ago, I had no idea that I would actually be locked in here for an entire month. And I want to thank you, the viewer, specifically, because without you, I don't think this would be possible. Now, I feel like I've had a pretty good attitude given the circumstances, and I've been patient during this process, but at this point, I'm going to have to turn over a new leaf, and enough is enough. Whoever put that fish in the building, it's payback time. No more Mr. Nice Guy, okay? So from here on out, game on. Let's hear our verse of the week. Matthew 7:24 through 29. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, and the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundations on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rains came down, and the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teachings, because he had taught as one who had authority, and not as their teachers of the law. Well, we're continuing to talk about foundations this week, and it's Friday, so that means it's time to reveal our Trivia Tuesday winners. Now, a little bit of housekeeping. If you've been following the show, you may have noticed that we did not have a Trivia Tuesday winner last week. We had a lot of people answer the question, attempt to get it right, and got very, very close. If you remember, the question was, how many times and what stories do we see how many of Jesus interacting with fish? And so we have Jesus talking about good and bad gifts versus, if your son asks for a fish, would you give him a snake? He talks about becoming fishers of men when he calls his apostles, they're out fishing. He tells them to cast their nets on the other side and they have a miraculous catch. Later on, we see him with his miracle of feeding the 5,000 with the bread and the fish that he changes and does that miracle. Later on, we see him cooking breakfast for his apostles. After he's resurrected, he kind of has a breakfast with them on the beach. But the one that nobody got, Matthew chapter 17, verses 24 through 27. Kind of a random story in scripture, but let's read it. After Jesus and his disciples arrived in Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma tax came to Peter and asked, "Doesn't your teacher pay the temple tax?" "Yes, he does," he replied. When Peter came into the house, Jesus was the first to speak. "What do you think, Simon?" he asked. "From whom do the kings of the earth collect duty and taxes? From their own sons or from others?" "From others," Peter answered. "Then the sons are exempt," Jesus said to him. "But so that he may not offend them, go to the lake and throw out your line. Take the first fish you catch, open its mouth, and you will find a 4 drachma coin. Take it and give it to them for my tax and yours." So here Jesus does another miracle. Here Jesus is paying his taxes with coins found inside of a fish. Very weird story here, and I was hoping that my stimulus check was going to be inside of that fish, but it wasn't. So that was kind of a bummer. But this week's Trivia Tuesday question, who was the second oldest character in Scripture? The second oldest character in Scripture is the grandfather of the oldest character in Scripture, Methuselah, and the oldest character in Scripture's name is Jared. We will talk about the significance of that a little bit more next week, so stay tuned. We're going to kind of change gears and look back on some Old Testament characters that through their lives we learn lessons from, and sometimes not necessarily what to do, but what not to do in certain situations. And we'll compare and contrast them to Jesus himself and the ways that he's a truer and better character. So when we read these stories, there's not much room for hero worship in Scripture. It all points to Jesus. We see the great things that these men do when they're in stride with God, when they're fully in motion with the things that he's doing and with his will. But then the other times that they're not, we learn those lessons and see that laid out before us. Sometimes some of the worst things that people have done in these accounts, and Jesus is the only one that is able to fulfill that and redeem those things. So our Trivia Tuesday winner was Colleen. Congratulations, Colleen. So the first character that we're going to look at next week in our case study is Joseph, one of my personal favorite characters in Scripture. And if you remember, we talked about Hebrews chapter 11, the faith chapter. By faith, all these guys get rattled off wealth, all these accomplishments. Joseph has kind of a weird one. And if you remember just the Cliff Notes version of his life, sold into slavery because his brothers are jealous. Remember the coat of many colors. He's taken to different prisons. He goes to different people's houses, interprets dreams, ends up being the second in command in Egypt. And then his brothers come back, and we'll look at all those accounts and all those stories, a lot of things that we can take from Joseph's life and apply to our own and then see Christ through. Verse 22 of Hebrews chapter 11, by faith Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions about his bones. They left out the coat of many colors, the dreams he interprets, being sold into slavery, being second in command in Egypt, saving them from famine. So what do you think the significance of that might be? If you want to comment below or send your answers, we'll talk about Joseph on Monday and look into his life. So until then, I hope you have a great day. Stay encouraged, stay healthy. See you tomorrow.